Today I'm going to be diving into the history of Games Workshop 40k army books, or codexes. We're going to take a look through each edition and look at how the books in those editions shaped up. Starting with books I never owned from 2nd edition, to early tomes like my 3rd edition Guard Codex, all the way until today, with 10th edition codexes such as the ones that Games Workshop sent us today, like this AdMech one. We're going to review how they changed, look at modern options like digital downloads, the new app, data sheets, and decide, hey, are these books even worth getting anymore? It's tabletop time. So to start this journey, I need to start in the digital world, because I was too young to have played 2nd edition. I would have been a little toddler when these books were coming out, and with an inclination to swallow small plastic parts more than paint them, we're gonna have to just look through the history books. First edition of Warhammer 40k was known as Rogue Trader, and for the roughly 6 years it was out, it existed kind of independently from what would be known as modern Warhammer 40k. It was in Warhammer 40k 2nd edition that codexes actually started to come out, introducing army rules and factional lore in a way that had never been done before. Codexes at this time were full of rich lore and introduced the factions and the units within those factions quite thoroughly for the time. This can be seen as a bit of a follow-on from Rogue Trader, which was sort of part role-playing game, and those roots and inspirations are clearly seen in 2nd edition codexes. They were black and white soft cover with a small section of color pages for the army showcase. Interestingly, in 2nd edition codexes, often there was the inclusion of photocopyable pages designed for you to print and then cut out tokens, templates, war scroll cards, data sheets, things that can aid your game. And they would come free in the book. All you need to do is scan them, print them, and cut them out. I will say, with the benefit of hindsight, looking back at these early codexes, they are laid out terribly. Unit profiles are divorced from their equipment, and you kind of need to read the entire book like an encyclopedia to understand what's going on. It's funny to see a lot of rules and notes that are called back to even now, such as seeing sustained fire close to sustained hits on weapon profiles. There are entire pages dedicated to describing the equipment and the members of these particular units, and the whole book has a lore-first approach. The rules and their specifics are written very casually in these books, which leads to a lot of useless words in describing unit interactions. Aside from a painting showcase of some high-quality paint jobs from the era, there is also a section at the back that's really interesting, as it's basically a catalog showing miniatures available in the range as they come. Metal models with their parts separate and plastic sprues visible in the codex. An annoying feature of these books is the amount of page flipping required. Units summarized, profiles mentioned, but then war gear and points cost not explained till later and independently on separate pages. 2nd edition feels really like a grab bag, trying to figure out the magic of what had made the early games so fun. Ultimately though, 2nd edition would be supplanted by 3rd edition and some of the most fondly remembered codexes of the era, especially for Chaos players. Why should you collect the Imperial Guard? 3rd edition books open with a why to collect page that 2nd edition didn't have. They briefly summarize the faction and talk about reasons why you would want to buy the book and collect the army. It seems almost like this was designed for in-store copies, where people would be able to leaf through, look at those first couple of pages, and make a decision about whether they'd like the faction. They were medium-length soft cover books, mostly black and white, with full color covers and a full color section, somewhere in the middle. Unlike the lore-forward and heavy approach of 2nd edition, the books dive straight into the rules. Army lists only interspersed with a few lore snippets in character and in universe, and then weapon abilities and special rules following shortly after. Something I note that is really unique about 3rd edition codexes is the amount of encouragement to create. A lot of the rules allow for optional picking of things that aren't sold in model boxes. The army showcases showcase conversions of models and kits that aren't sold by Games Workshop. We get to see some really fun community projects and inspiring ways to take your army and theme that army in different angles. And the whole game seems to be built around this semi-homebrew, build your own army vibe. It's very inclusive and very freeing creatively, and possibly I think contributes to why 3rd edition is looked back on as a truly different era. One thing that's notable here is 3rd edition is split between early 3rd edition and late 3rd edition, what people often called 3.5. And those early 3rd edition codexes are really short. They're quite skimpy on the lore. There's not much there aside from the rules, and they really feel like a companion to play rather than a tome of knowledge you'd want to pour through over and over. That changed in 3.5 though. While revered as artworks by many, the 3.5 Codexes are softback, they're small, they're black and white, but they're full of good stuff. And you can't appreciate it just by looking at it, so let's rifle through. Now, this book isn't as well loved as my 3.5 Chaos Codex, but I actually couldn't find that in preparation for this video. However, I did almost collect IG as well at the time, so I have the Imperial Guard Codex. There is a rapid return to a lore-first approach here, but there is the retention of that introduction page from early third. The color section has moved much closer to the front, immediately showcasing some cool armies and the fun introduction of paint guides. There are a lot more larger army showcases here, and from second to third there seems to have been a massive increase in the amount of models fielded on the table. There are lots of alternate paint schemes for armies presented in full color photos, as well as little guides like how to use transfers. There isn't a huge amount of lore, but definitely a lot more than the early third codexes. The books are also far better laid out, with all of the units' options on the page with the unit and their profile, and special rules held in one place. This guard book comes in at a mere 63 pages, but that 63rd page is a lovely summary that makes it a lot easier to use your army. These books felt like a dabble into basically doing a bit of everything. A little bit of lore, good rules, and it's pretty compact. Were they the best? I don't actually think so. Maybe the rules of third for some factions were, but not the books themselves. So let's see if they could keep improving their books. As I pull my 4th edition Chaos Codex out from where it belongs, the bin, Chaos players get it. The first thing I notice is the price tag, 38 Australian dollars. Just kind of funny, because I think Codexes are like $91 now. It's 20 years, roughly, since this came out, and they've more than doubled in price. They have increased in quality, but let's look at this one. Well, I know this is a talk about books, not rules editions. I do want to quickly say this book was a devastation to Chaos players. We came from a 3.5 to this. The rules of 4th edition were so streamlined and stripped down. All the options, all the joy that people had come to love about 3rd edition was gone. They went for a tournament-focused, stripped down rule set, and they got this. I think that juxtaposition probably helps to cement that real feeling of like old Hammer and new Hammer, and the line really feels like it's 3rd edition and before. It's that change from this like roleplay inspired, you build your own army, custom rules, convert your models, all that changed, and 4th edition was like, nah, it's tournaments, you play the rules we give you sort of thing, and that's really the dividing line. This marked the beginning. But as I said before, the focus is the books. And what about this book? The book is almost double the length of a 3.5 Codex, and while, as I just mentioned, the rules are an abomination relative to the amazing options we had, the way they're organized is actually pretty good. Options are clearly stated on army lists, and it's all laid out pretty simply. There's no color, there's no pictures, it's just these black and white little unit entries stacked on top of each other. It's not very exciting. But it's when you go before this, before the rule section that we complain about from 4th edition, to the lore section, that you see really a massive return to form. All of the units have profiles returned in much the same way as the 2nd edition Codex did. We have these full pages with art and descriptions of every single unit in the book, the lore that explains the model that we use on the tabletop. And this is probably my favorite feature of 4th edition Codexes. If I was to be positive about them, it's that they double, triple even the amount of lore. We do have that annoying inclusion of the semi-rule profile in the lore sections again though, where they've got these sort of half their rules but not fully written out. They don't have points costs. It doesn't say exactly what war gear they have. It's annoying, and it does mean you have to flip back and forth. So I don't know why they did that. They did it again. They've got these efficient rules at the back, and then they just print this stuff up the front for no reason. You have to go digging for all the special rules for like Plague Marines, which is a pain. And that trend will continue into 5th edition. I largely skipped 5th edition. It was around the time I was at uni, and the 4th edition Codex had turned me off games so much that I was waiting for a new Codex, and it never came. Which means I don't have a physical copy of any 5th edition Codexes. However, this was the edition that Jen got into Warhammer with the Dark Eldar book. Softback, black and white pages with some color sections, an introduction which is a forward for the faction followed with some hefty lore. The use of historic timelines begun to rise here, possibly due to now years of more fleshed out lore and dozens of Black Library books to begin taking references from. I always enjoyed these timelines, giving an idea of what types of engagements armies commonly partook in, and often some dark humor was spread about in this section. All in all, there's 3 or 4 sections in the book you need to flip back and forth between to actually know what a unit does or to build an army. Overall, there's all the benefits of 4th and some of the benefits of 2nd coming in, with not a huge amount of detractions. However, with the formula having stayed fairly steady for several editions, 6th edition was on the horizon, and that was a huge shakeup. So we've gone to 6th edition, and 6th edition was probably the biggest change of codexes in the whole history of Warhammer, because they went to full color hardbacks like this. It also meant a huge leap in price. In Australia, codexes went from around $40, $44 up to $70. And a lot of people really didn't like this. I remember at the time there was a huge amount of backlash from people. And I think it really divided the gamers who saw these as rule books for playing the game from collectors who saw these as tomes of lore and art for their faction. One thing hindsight had kind of robbed me of is just how big a leap in production quality these books were. It wasn't just that they became full color and hardback. Even little things like spacing all improved drastically in these books. Overall, the finish feels significantly more professional. In terms of layout, it is fairly similar to the previous editions, with a whole bunch of lore up front, followed by a middle section with an army showcase and some of your introduction to rules, and then some army lists towards the back and the unit profiles and points costs. One thing that's really nice is they started to include page reference numbers on the special rules so you knew where to flip to. However, they have kept that weird semi-profile on all of the lore sections. So if you want to use a unit in your army, you kind of need to flip between 3 different sections: the generic war gear, their unit profile at the end of the book, and also earlier in the book to see if they have any special artifacts or special rules which are printed with their lore. I don't really understand why they did this. There's so much double handling and flipping in the books that actually makes them kind of annoying as a gaming supplement. They do have quite a nice fold-out summary page at the back that none of the previous editions had included. All of the codexes went for this full art design on the front with this sort of bold font and quite impactful, if a little bit dark, but the art on this edition are gorgeous, and the fact you get it full color is really cool. And they did change this in 7th edition. So I don't have a 7th edition codex to hand because Chaos Space Marines didn't receive one, and at the time that was the only army I played. But when 7th did roll around, a lot of the improvements from 6th edition were retained, while even more things were fixed. I'm not talking about the rules. Talking about the codex. The 7th edition codexes continued the trend of having high quality bespoke layout design and art for each of the factions. This might seem like a little thing, but in previous editions we didn't have this. The books were black and white. They didn't have these special page markers and Tau themed color gradients with hexes, for example. Books open with significant lore sections covering the army with timelines and history. It also continues to have those wonderful individual unit entry lore pages. Gorgeous art and a full page of story. You know exactly what the units in your army do. But this time they finally omitted those pointless second handlings of rules, and these are just lore. It's like they've been listening to my video. The showcase sections now include a whole bunch of color layouts, basically showing off unit markings and official paint schemes in a bit of a different way using graphic design. They then go on to the army showcases, which I will say by 7th edition I think are starting to feel a little bit more stale. By this time Warhammer's presence online was a lot more than it had been. Codexes used to be a melting pot of studio armies, weird wacky things, occasionally cool conversions, but definitely a broad range of models. The rules section here was significantly improved with pretty much everything you need on a single page, including a picture of the model for complete clarity. There's points costs here, there's unit options, and there's special rules when they're bespoke to the character. After this section we have a full war gear section, so there's only limited flipping back and forth. 8th edition. Some love it, some hate it, but no one can argue that this is when we really entered the modern era of Warhammer 40k. It would mark one fantastic thing, which is the first time ever where armies would get an update every single edition. Every edition since 8th, every army has had some kind of update, which means no one's left in the lurch waiting for ages. This did also start the problem of too many codexes too frequently, with some armies getting 2 codexes in an edition. For many, this was too much. Being forced to buy new books all the time was incredibly frustrating. But for others, perhaps those who were used to playing factions that had waited a very long time between updates, this was a welcome change. Noticed broadly across 8th edition is the beginning of what seemed to be a little bit more rushing. More books were printed with errors, requiring day 1 FAQs, but before this could happen, indexes came out. The entire game system was wiped clean and we got these books, one for each Grand Alliance. And for the first time, they tried to compress pretty much all the rules of a unit onto one page. But for a time, games were actually pretty balanced, at least in my local game community. As long as people weren't exploiting the obvious problems, it was pretty chill. However, these books are definitely stopgaps. There's nothing exciting about them. However, it was probably the cheapest and most accessible it has been to get rules for your army in quite a long time. After the index era, codexes started to drop. Chaos, in fact, got 2 codexes in 8th edition, the second one being a personal insult. That was probably the most horrible, limited, force you to spend money on basically nothing book I've ever bought. It's got my name on it. With commentary about the horrible rules and the way they treated Chaos in 8th edition, remember the 2 wounds for Chaos debacle? The main focus is on the books, and these books are actually pretty good. They're quite similar to 7th edition. They have all the lore up front, individual pages for each faction, lots of different paint schemes and ideas for building your army. If anything, the showcase section is a little bit smaller, but what is nice to see, and one of the good things about 8th edition, is that the unit entries contain everything you need to use the unit. We do seem to enter a stage where flipping between rules in a book is becoming a thing of the past. However, the problem with 8th became the creep of the amount of publications rules were printed in. So while no longer did you have to flip to 4 different sections within your book to actually play a unit, instead you needed to flip between 4 different books to actually play your army. This was kind of the publication apocalypse era, and an era where I think codexes started to get a pretty bad rap. Digital books existed and you could buy them, and they were updated, or some of them were updated, when FAQs dropped. But the physical books weren't. And given that many books were printed with errors that needed to be immediately fixed and the digital copies were valid, people began to ask why even bother having these books anymore. 9th edition marks the only edition of Warhammer 40k since 3rd edition that I've never played. The treatment of Chaos Space Marines was so bad, and the bitter taste in my mouth from buying Codex 2.0 Chaos and then have the 2 wound Space Marines, all that stuff. I never engaged with the game due to those changes and how I just disliked the edition. But I digress. Codexes. In 9th edition, we did start to see limited edition codexes, and often what they were starting to do was sell these in FOMO boxes where you get an army and a limited edition codex. You get it a few months before the army's actually released. It's my preferred way of releasing limited edition codexes. I think it's really cool because you actually aren't paying a huge amount of money. You're not paying like $180 for the limited edition books, which I've never understood for a different cover. But you are getting a special exclusive book that's only in a launch box that if you're hype about an army, you're gonna want anyway. So I actually like that. However, what did begin to happen in 9th edition that I didn't like is the encroachment of things like Crusade and stratagems, alternate ways to play, and heaps of data sheets for the same unit. They were often doing 3 or 4 data sheets for a tank with 1 data sheet for each different main gun, for example. It led to a situation where all the stuff I loved about codexes, all the lore, started to get crushed. This book only has 34 pages of lore in a 150 plus page book, which I can contrast immediately with my 8th edition Chaos Codex, which has 97 pages of lore. Doing away with the individual unit entries with the art and the explanation of each unit is a real miss for me, and it's probably the biggest thing I miss. One of the coolest things about codexes, and one of the things that I think made them collectible for an army, is what I loved about books as a kid. I always think about that when I think about who these products are for. A younger hobbyist who probably can't afford too many things gets most of what they get through birthdays and Christmases. This book became their Bible, their video game companion that they would pore over and over and over and obsess and get excited about the stories and lore, what units they wanted to collect or ask for Christmas. And I always thought that was really special. So I think removing that from the books and making them more of a gaming aid that then still is priced premium, starting to look a little bit sketchy. By the way, I didn't mention this. The rules, they're fine. The rule layout, it's fine. It's the same as 8th. It's the unit entries. They're all in one place. It's good. But they're now competing with data cards, digital codexes, and, well, PDFs online. And without the lore, without the heart and soul, who are these books for? Well, let's see how that's changed in 10th. Dramatic lighting! Yes, that's right. It's 10th edition. Games Workshop have actually sent us the Necron Codex, the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex. They've sent us some data cards. We've previously been sent the Space Marines Codex. And the first thing off the bat I wanted to say is that the actual layout and design is pretty good. They bring you a little bit of darkness back. I'm fond of the little overlays, the cutaways and segments. I don't think that they've immediately addressed the thing I love the most, which is lore. We still don't have those individual unit profiles, and even the Space Marine book has 67 odd pages of lore, while the Adeptus Mechanicus has 37. We're looking at like a third less lore for the big factions. However, a real positive thing with this edition is I do love the way they've laid out the rules. These data cards are so easy to use, and it does segue quite naturally into the data cards themselves. Now, I do like that these data cards have this fancy trim on them, so they're nice and shiny and red. They feel good, they feel thick. I really like them. I will say mine have some slight crimping issues. It's almost like the blade that cut them wasn't 100% sharp enough on one edge. Being quite anal to talk about that, but it is something I noticed. However, what is the point of this when this exists? 2 pages of rules for each army that you're realistically going to actually use. You have all of these data sheet cards, and then you have a section at the back of points and a section at the back of crusade rules. So day one, the points in these books are wrong. So you immediately don't even worry about them. Which means, why even include them? And that sounds crazy, right? Now, I will say, before people arc up, I actually do think this is a good thing, and I know that's weird. Publishing a book where things are out of date immediately, not good. And I do like they've included a QR code and you scan that on your phone and it takes you to the FAQ download page. So provided the points aren't paywalled, I actually don't have a problem with the points being out of date in the Codex. That's fine. If in day one you've got access to new points that are more competitive, more balanced, more accurate, and they're free, that's okay. And I think it's really important that they get the rules right, but the points is something that can be a bit more dynamic. But data cards. These are so much better to play with than flipping through a book. You can just have the ones you want in your army. So my question becomes, are these worth it? Like Australians, do you want to pay $90 for this book? The data cards are really expensive too, but I think I would buy data cards and just find the rules for my detachment, because it's only 2 pages, right? The other thing worth noting is these books also include the digital rules. So they have a code at the back that you can redeem. The app is a subscription-based app that you have to pay for, but I've theoretically bought this book. So do I need a subscription to access the digital rules that I've bought? Okay, we did it. It's fine. So you can with a free account. I mean, it comes up constantly. It's like, subscribe to Warhammer Plus. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna subscribe to Warhammer Plus. If you want to, that's chill. But you can, on a free account, you can access the rules. I tried to use the AdMech code and it said it registered, but I couldn't access anything in that. I'm guessing because it's in pre-order. It's not actually on the app yet. But the Space Marine Codex was. This weights my decision a little bit. I do think the digital rules and integration with an app that finally works actually makes these not that bad. It's quite good, the fact you don't have to pay the subscription to use your rules for your army. Obviously there's limits on the amount of lists you can build on the app, but having a reference in your pocket at all times is pretty cool. I actually would really like that, because I often in the middle of nowhere about, oh, I want a theory craft. So you buy the book, you get the digital, and that was something that never happened and people had wanted for ages. They wanted the digital codex to come with the physical book. I think Games Workshop, I would love to see you add like 30 or 40 more pages into the lore section for every faction. Give me that full page describing a Skitarii Vanguard and a Skitarii Ranger, every single unit in the book for all the factions. Just spread that out a little bit more, and then make sure these books stick around for 3 years. Get them all out within 18 months and then have them all last for 3 years before the next replacement. I know that will never happen because, well, the cycle of replacing books, I just don't think it will. But I would love to see a book like the Space Marines Codex not get updated for 3 years and for it to take 18 months for the rest to get updated, and then we're back to starting the cycle again. And they don't have to be in the same order. You can shuffle it around, give it a 6-month shuffle window, everything, just mix them all up. And then I think people would feel like they're kind of getting their rules updated frequently enough, but their books, they at least know I'm getting 3 years. And then you can make an informed decision. And I think that would be really, really cool to see. For me personally, or for anyone who doesn't have issues with buying the hobby, I would definitely get these data cards. I think they're great. As with all Games Workshop things, I think they're really expensive, but as a gaming tool, very nice. I'd much rather this than printing everything out. As for the codexes, I'd be iffy on, personally, anything that's got a 1.5 year shelf life. I can't guarantee I'm gonna play enough games to really merit buying that. Something I liked about 6th and 7th edition codexes is the lore felt like it added new content. It was adding a lot of exciting stuff, and not just a little half paragraph of timeline shift, but actual meaty changes or additions to the lore. You'd find out more about each unit and how they work in each edition. And that was really cool, and it made each book worth looking back at. Whereas when I think about a 9th edition codex, there's nothing in this that is worth looking back at, because all of the army showcases is just art I can see posted online by Warhammer community. It's just photos of the studio armies, and all the lore is kind of like the same forward. It's like a brief overview of the faction that's very slightly reshuffled in each codex to get a new player into it. Well, go deeper and make them have more value. Overall though, I will say, I do think people have forgotten how average quality older codexes were. People think about the rules a lot, and that is important, but actually the production of these books, they are a lot nicer than they used to be, but they could be nicer. I'm surprised things like this limited edition Imperial Guard Codex didn't have a little stringy thing. A little stringy thing is so good. Give us a little stringy thing. And there are a lot of features from the Age of Sigmar battle tomes I'd love to see. The painting guides they include in the Age of Sigmar battle tomes are fantastic. And that would be a really cool thing that would make these codexes feel a little bit more valuable as well. So there you go. That's the journey of codexes. We've gone from 2nd edition all the way to today. What do you think? Now, I don't really want a big fight in the comments about price. I think we all agree Games Workshop products are very expensive, and we all agree that times are tougher for everyone out there. So paying for those luxury products is harder and harder. And I'm not justifying their prices. All I'm saying is we get it. But what do you think about the actual book? Where is the happy ground? What are the best memories from codexes that make you smile, the things you remember poring over as a kid? Because for me, the last couple of editions have been very effective books, but a little bit forgettable. Better for gaming, not as good for the hobby. Whereas 6th and 7th edition, I actually think, wildly enough, pretty much hit the nail on the head for the blend of lore and rules. Capturing some of the stuff introduced in 2nd edition and keeping it, so they're these weighty tomes. I'm quite sure there'll be more content in this book that I can go back and read over and explore than there will be in the 10th edition Chaos Codex, and it's a bit of a shame. But with that said, the advent of digital connections does add a value proposition to these books that never existed before. I honestly think these are the best starter cards they've ever made. They're just so nice, and I love the trim. I'm a sucker for the shiny trim. The art also, clarity. Anyway, that's it. I've rambled. This is too long. I'm out. Oh, thank you to our patrons. You're wonderful. Thank you so much for supporting our videos. Let us know what you thought of this sort of opinion piece and dive into history. It's been cool. You're cool. Yeah. Bye.